Established in 2006, Studio 22 Open Gallery is a contemporary commercial fine art gallery. Dedicated to promoting the development of emerging artists, progressing the advancement of mid-career professional artists, and providing exposure for established artists, Studio 22 is celebrated as an art destination in downtown Kingston. One of the main missions of Studio 22 is to expand the gallery's reach and help cultivate and develop more original art buyers locally, nationally, and internationally. We are particularly enthused about attracting a new clientele of younger generation art buyers and are committed to ensuring Studio 22 is globally recognized for its acclaimed artwork, accomplished artists, and accessible prices. With a focus on developing new art collectors, it is the goal of the gallery to market or export the work of our talented local artists, while at the same time bringing or importing unique art and artists from other parts of Canada to our local community, as well as visitors to Kingston. Another one of the gallery's missions is to make original art accessible to everyone, regardless of budget. The gallery does this by not only having unique pieces of art at every price point, but by also providing a variety of options like our rent-to-try and rent-to-own payment plan options. We have an extensive virtual gallery and online gallery shop where visitors can view and purchase artwork 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and have it shipped directly to their front door. We also offer a robust business art rental program for both commercial spaces as well as in-home office setups. It is our belief that once a person buys their first piece of original artwork, they will be hooked and be art collectors for life. We hope you will take the opportunity to visit us and explore what Studio 22 has to offer, either in person or online anytime.
Erica Olson began her fine art studies at Queen's University, which gave her a foundation in painting, drawing, and sculpture. Looking for a broader artistic experience, she attended the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, where she explored textiles and conceptual art. She completed her BFA at Concordia University in 1997, concentrating on painting, and then relocated to Kingston to set up her art practice. She has had numerous solo and group exhibitions showing in Kingston, Toronto, Calgary, and in the UK. Erica Olson has had commercial and artistic success in traditional painting and pastel drawing. Studio 22 began working with Erica in 2014 when she first exhibited with a group of artists known as Shag Rug Collective. The group met regularly to socialize and paint together, often using a still life tableaus as their shared subject. The collective had a second group show at Studio 22 in 2016. After the first encounter with Erica, the gallery began to exhibit her work regularly. In 2015, she had her first show titled Still Life in Oils. This collection ranged from the intimate to the expansive in a domestic sphere, with studies of single vegetables to collections of multiple food elements to a view of that realm from inside looking out. Bright colors and a flat perspective were features of her work during this period. In 2017, Erica surprised her audience with Color Blast, a collection of abstract works on canvas and paper. The second solo show seemed at first to be a complete departure. It was, however, a return for the artist, harking back to her earliest days of painting. The constants throughout all of her work being her saturated color schemes and intuitive sense of balancing shapes. In 2018, the artist experimented with a series of works on paper where color was mostly absent, working with a dominant palette of black, gray, and white, allowing for only one or two accents of color. 2019's work continued with more abstracts on paper, allowing the artist to refine her shapes and colors. Now, in 2020, the artist makes a return to her still lives with a clear focus on the shared warmth and energy of the idyllic delights of home. There is a maturity and assuredness in these works, both in composition and color, that make her recent journey back to abstraction seem like the needed tonic away from, and then back to, the true source of her inspiration and artistic voice.
Hello, I'm Erica Olson. I just wanted to start out by talking about the cakes, the cake paintings. I think there's half of the exhibition has cakes, so If you know my work, I did a series of cakes before, and they're quite different, and the inspiration was quite different. Those cakes, I would walk into Metro and I'd be assaulted by their bakery section and all these crazy cakes with white icing, and I immediately thought titanium white, straight from the tube. And so those paintings had goopy goppy, all kinds of titanium white, like straight from the tube. So, whereas these cake paintings have been inspired by a Betty Crocker cookbook, and you might ask yourself why. And this particular cookbook was given to my mother in 1964, and when she was a young bride, and we find it quite amusing, some of the instructions to the new bride and the homemaker, and we've had many a good kind of chuckle about the advice that's being given. But the real reason that I picked these images is that they were very much a different kind of palette and a different kind of color than what I usually reach for. As an artist, one tends to maybe get into habits of setting up a palette in a certain way. So those are all a different experience for me, different kinds of colors, different kinds of compositions, blowing up the images, and working from photograph, which I don't normally do. It's the first time. So cakes in general, I think as a subject matter, one might think that they're kind of frivolous, but if you think about our things that we celebrate, there's often a cake involved. And when you think with COVID, all of the different celebrations and all the different events that were postponed or canceled or just, that didn't happen or happened in a very different way, most of those events had a cake, like a birthday cake for an important marker of like maybe 75, or retirement cakes and Christmas cakes, or we're not to Christmas yet, but wedding cakes being sort of one of the main ones. People could no longer have a wedding, or they postponed it, or it was just reduced to very few people. I think wedding cakes are one of the most obvious of that idea of like a before and an after an event where there happens to be a cake, and when you think of two people forming a union, and there's a piece of cake, and they eat it together. So that's kind of how I ended up painting the cakes, with those sorts of ideas kind of in my mind a little bit. And then before COVID, I was in London, England, and I was able to see some really amazing art and go to some great museums and stuff like that. And I wasn't there very long, but I was there long enough to get a real shot in the arm in terms of inspiration. And I mean, Instagram's great, and looking, at our computer screen is great too, but there's nothing quite as amazing as seeing art in the real and traveling somewhere and just being able to soak it in a way that digital just cannot do. It's just impossible. So I called this Conversations, and the two larger pieces, I like to think of the elements in the paintings as not just formal elements, but elements that talk to each other in a way that isn't just a formal way, but that they kind of have their own personalities. The objects kind of have their own personalities and how they interact, and I like to see them in that light. The larger pastels, again, I've been doing pastels for over 10 years, and I've been very fortunate, actually, because my partner Simon found an auction, and there was a cabinet full of chalk pastels, and chalk pastels are quite expensive. A little chalk pastel could cost you about $4, so that adds up. And he found this cabinet full of chalk pastels, and so I thought, okay, well, I'll bid on it, and I bid $800, and I thought, okay, it's it's worth a lot, and I'm going to go as high as $800, which is a lot of money for supplies. And I got it for $250, and I think it's worth a couple $1,000s, to be honest, just in art supplies. So I don't recommend working in chalk pastels, but I will continue to work in chalk pastels, but you have to wear a mask because the pigments are airborne and they're really bad for you, and it's a good idea to wear gloves. So there's certain occupational hazards. You have to fix them, but I find that they do things that paintings can't do in the same way. The real flatness of the pastel is, I think, is unique to its medium, and the layering, over and over again, and getting the depth of color. I think, I think it's kind of unique to that medium. I have changed my chalk pastels. This grouping is different in that I've gotten rid of the table. They're not sitting on a table anymore, and there's no kind of horizon line. They're interacting more with the material that they're on. So they're what would be called surface design. They're like interacting much more with that rather than a tabletop kind of, which would be more normal for still life. Usually there's some kind of base, a tabletop. And then some of them are uniquely standing alone, kind of as soliloquies. They're not interacting with other objects. They're standing alone, and that's kind of new for me as well. So that's good. And then there's the smaller pastels, and I think the cakes were a little bit subconscious during COVID. During the cakes were a little bit unconscious, a little bit different than the smaller pastels, which were much more dealing with COVID and the idea of, for instance, Coffee with You came out of the memory of not being able to go out and not being able to see people. And then when that lifted and we could go out and see people, there's a whole risk assessment that one has to go through. And I personally didn't go to any cafes, but the drawing is really, it's about going out for coffee, and the people are no longer there. And so what you have is these mugs that are interacting with each other without the people. And so it's the idea of having an animated coffee with your friends and that little hit of caffeine to make it even more animated. So that was why I called it Coffee with You. And then espresso cups after midnight, I felt that they looked a little bit, the title came after that drawing actually, but I felt like they kind of had been going out on the town, and they were a little bit drunk maybe, in that their shapes were a little bit off, and so I thought that I would call it espresso after midnight, because often if we've been out drinking, we decide to have a coffee to sober up. So that's kind of what that piece is all about, or is pointing to. And then another pastel actually is the one over here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a teapot, and that one again is about COVID, in that the nice weather came and the lockdown ended, and we were able to social distance and be outside. So it was wonderful to have that time to be able to be outside with friends. And so that teapot is with the greenery is about that. And obviously we don't know what's going to happen, and the second wave is on its way, or in place in a number of places. So those three are kind of hopeful ones, about going out together again in the future, and maybe having a few drinks together in the future out somewhere, and just the wonderfulness of being with good friends. outside in the nice weather, with that becoming a normal thing that we do again. Oh, okay. Yeah, so basically the show consists of these celebratory cakes, and then larger pieces, which are called conversations because they act within each other. They act together within the painting, and then these larger pastels are. Again, the table has been taken away, and they're reacting to the textile background, and then finally the smaller pastels, which to my mind deal more directly with the COVID experience, but it is an experience that changes all of us, and as an artist, it does. Become a bit of a subject matter, kind of like it or not. It gets under your skin, and I think it comes out as a creative person when you're working.
We are back with our Q&A with Erica Olson. I'm Ali Jacob, Director of Studio 22. Erica, thank you very much for being with us today, for doing this. I know it's a little different for all of us. This
Definitely
is
different.
Opening, yay! So we have a couple of questions coming in on Facebook. So the first one is from Avi. As someone who's had a lot of experience creating in a collective environment, how have you found working in isolation during the pandemic? How, if at all, has it changed the way you work?
Okay. Well, I am part of a group. We're called the Shag Rug Collective, but we haven't been able to meet at all during the COVID experience. We have Zoomed a couple of times, which is good. So working alone, I'm really quite used to working alone, and my partner is in the next studio. But we're not in the same studio, but he's in the same building as me, so I'm not truly alone. But it's always difficult when you're on your own, because I think what happens in a group is that you know that you're unique, and you know that you're different than everyone else in your group, and that can be really reassuring. And when you're on your own, I think sometimes you can compare yourself to other people who are almost, in art history, or compare yourself to other people in a way that's quite false. But when you're in a real group, I think it's very reassuring, because you kind of know who you are. You kind of know where you stand, because there's other people who are doing the same thing, but doing it much more different than you. So it's the reassurance of being in a group compared to, I think, maybe being too self-critical when you're on your own.
So harder.
So it's harder, yeah, because the self-criticism is harder, yeah.
Okay. Our next question is from Meg. Are the textile backgrounds for the still lives actually pieces of fabric that you have, or did you invent the designs?
They're actual pieces of fabric, yeah, and I'd like to get some more, actually, yeah.
So you work with a lot that you...
I have a whole section that's just fabrics in my studio, yeah.
Great. Next question. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received as it relates to your craft?
Oh, that's hard. I just came across some letters, and it's not one piece of advice, but I was exchanging some writing with a friend, and this goes way back now. This is probably about 18 years ago, and we had this writing, and I remember him writing that, and it was a quote from someone else: "Art is not served by doing the easiest thing," and something like that. I can't quote it exactly, and I think that's probably the best advice in a lot of ways of make sure that you're not, like, if you're looking for colors on your palette, like, don't go for the easiest thing just because it's there. Yeah, don't go for what's just there, like, yeah. So I think that might have been the most useful thing.
Mm-hmm. What is your most important artist tool? What can you not live without when you're creating in your studio?
Oh, that's hard. Lighting.
Natural light?
And I like natural light. Yeah. So that, and then of course whatever supplies you need for that project. But yeah.
How has your art and artistic process changed and evolved over the years? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting because I think I kind of go around and around in circles in a way. For instance, when I had a wonderful studio out at Highway 2, and it was a situation where it was my father-in-law's log cabin, and he was away, and I had this space, and it was a completely domestic space, and there was a window to the river, and there were all of these wonderful pots and plants and stuff, and I did a series there, and now I'm finding, and that was years ago, and now I'm curious again about that open window with a still life. That's sort of in my mind right now as maybe what I'm going to do next. So I think that I do tend to, in a way, maybe be inspired by my own work. I mean, inspired by other people's work, but I think sometimes I'll see something that I've done, and I'll think, hey, maybe I should do that again, but push it a bit further, or that type of process where you're actually inspired by your own work, which is obviously a positive thing.
So I think I have one more question. Do you have a favorite or preferred part of the artistic process? If so, what is it?
The middle.
What is that?
Beginning is hard, ending is hard. So I guess when you're in the middle and you're just working away and you still don't know exactly how it's going to be resolved, I think that's, and hard, starting is hard, as I said, so yeah.
Excellent. So I think that is the end of our Q&A with Erica. Once again, thank you so much for doing this with us, for helping us to launch your beautiful exhibit. And please come and see Erica's show at Studio 22, Conversations. It's really beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie.
One more thing. It's intermission. We're going to have a short intermission, and then we will be back with Deborah Krakow. Stay tuned.
Deborah Krakow has always been an artist, in more than one sense of the word. Born into a creative family, the Wolfe Island-based painter has had a long history as a free spirit, with an analytical side to boot. That passion for two worlds, art and physics, led her to the study of architecture. She graduated from McGill University and developed her artistic practice through courses in painting, printmaking, sculpture, fiber arts, and ceramics. Her work has been exhibited in her native city of Montreal, as well as Toronto, Ottawa, Kingston, Halifax, and New York State. Studio 22 began working with Deborah in May of 2013. The gallery had early success with sales of her acrylic abstracts on paper and canvas. Deborah has had 4 previous solo shows with the gallery. Evolving Surfaces, Spring 2014, acrylic and mixed media, explored abstracts from a textural perspective, adding quilting and sewing techniques to her paintings. Crows, Summer 2015, acrylics on paper, was created watching crows from a mountaintop in the south of India where they were constant companions in and around her rented home. Horizons, in the fall of 2016, were abstract landscapes evoking wide open spaces and expansive views. Continuing with landscapes, Remnants, fall 2017, explored the way structures and landscapes morph over time. What followed after this was a series of mini exhibits. Cows, pastoral realism on a grid of dots and pure abstract mixed media works, mini explosions of shapes and gestures on white surfaces. After a second trip to India, Deborah returned with watercolor sketchbooks documenting her experiences of the people and places she encountered over a 4-month period. With this, she created a book called Sketching in India, an artist's journal. Now, back in her studio on Wolfe Island, Deborah brings us her newest body of work, Slowing Down, paintings of people and creatures communing with nature. In some ways, this new work is a departure. In other ways, it is quintessential Krakow, exploring surfaces of the canvas and the mind.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. You know, painting is a really solitary activity, and I always look forward to these opening nights when everyone gets to come together and share a glass of wine. So this is kind of different. I kind of wish everyone was here, but I think this could be okay. So it's funny, you know, before the pandemic and kind of over the winter and into spring, I was getting ready for this show, and I was mostly painting landscapes of Wolfe Island, where I live, rural landscapes, the changing seasons. I did a series of cows, which are one of my favorite subject matters. And then I think it was around May, or maybe the end of April, I found that people started coming into the landscapes, and not just any people, but family members, the people who would normally come and stay with us in the summer and spend a few days and, you know, spend time just relaxing with us. And I started to realize that they weren't going to come this summer. This is going to be a really unusual summer. And I think one of the reasons that, well, obviously I love it when my family comes because they're my people and I love them. But part of it also is that when I don't have visitors, I just tend to keep working. And I don't really take that time to just slow down and get outside and unwind. And so that's really what this series of paintings is about. It's about getting outdoors, especially in the summer, and communing with nature. So that feeling of just feeling the sun on your shoulders, relaxing, feeling the wind through your hair. You know, maybe you kick off your sandals and burrow your toes in the wet grass, and you just breathe. And you sit still, you stop doing, and you're just being. And if you sit still long enough, you know, the butterflies start to come a little closer. The cat jumps into your lap. You know, maybe if you're standing outside, the cows come up to the fence because they're not afraid of you anymore. And so you experience the world differently. And for me, it's kind of a quintessential part of what summer is. So even though there are people in all of these paintings, so in a way they're deeply personal because these are real people that I know, but they're not portraits. They're meant to be very universal. and really to be about that kind of experience of slowing down and being outdoors in the landscape. So when I was painting them, I was very consciously placing the people. Often they're quite small in relation to the whole canvas, and sometimes they're off to one side or in a corner, so that the landscape occupies a fair bit of the canvas, and it gives that sort of visual breathing room, so that when you're looking at the painting, you experience that expansiveness just like the subject in the painting does. So if it's somebody kind of standing on the beach and gazing out to the horizon, the viewer looking at the painting also has that sense of standing on the beach and gazing out into the horizon. So you're not so much as observing the subject of the painting as experiencing their experience with them. For my color palette, you'll see a lot of sort of pale, beachy blues in the sky and the water. I used a lot of white. And then where the sun is hitting people's skin and hair, these really saturated, warm, rosy pinks and glowing reds. So it's that real contrast between the cool and the warm, and between the very, very bright sunlit space and kind of the more intimate personal space. And it's interesting because I'll do a whole series of large paintings, and then I like to work really small for a while, and often non-objectively. And so before I did this series for a while, I was doing these really small abstracts, kind of just whimsical shapes and lines. But when I was doing that, I was very consciously experimenting with a different color palette. It's kind of interesting because when I look back over work that I've done over the past years, I find it kind of dark and gloomy. There's a lot of blues and browns. And I think my mood has changed. You know, a couple of years ago, I stopped, basically quit my day job and became a full-time artist. And I think my spirit sort of lifted. And I want my work to reflect that. And so there's been this very conscious shift of palette. So even before I was working on this series, I was already experimenting with a palette of these pale turquoisey blues with sort of hot spots of red and bright pink. And you'll also see, well, I don't know if you can see it online, but if you do get a chance to come and look at the paintings, there's a lot of texture in them. And that's because the way I have come to develop landscape in a painting involves a lot of layering and layering and layering. And then you see bits of the underpainting kind of come through. And it's a very freeing way for me to work because I often start the painting before I even really know what the subject is going to be and just get a lot of texture and color down. And then I gradually obscure that as I'm working on top. So the paintings end up with a kind of richness of texture and color, even though you might see a big expanse of white. There's sort of a lot going on there. So in some ways, I think it said in my intro that these paintings are departure. I don't feel that. I feel that they're kind of a synthesis of everything I've been doing up until now, because I've spent years doing landscape and abstract landscape, which is obviously a component of these. I did, quite a number of years ago, I did a portraits of my family series. But more recently, when we were in India, I did a lot of watercolor sketching, specifically of people in an outdoor setting, and trying very consciously to use a very minimal amount of detail, but really look at how the light hits their body to get the gesture and to really get the essence of that person with a minimum amount of brush strokes. So those things combined with kind of finding an outlet for this palette that I've been working on, to me this series is kind of a very natural synthesis of everything that's been happening in my painting world for the past few years. So I think with that, I think I'll leave it off there. We're going to go into, you're going to see a virtual tour of the gallery. And after that, we have time for questions and answers. So I hope that you'll write in some questions and we can have a discussion. Thanks.
Well, welcome back to Studio 22 and our shop talk with Deborah Krakow and her show Slowing Down. So Deborah, there's a question that's come in online, and it says, what is it about certain figures, like cows and crows, that catches your attention?
Oh, good question. Well, cows and crows is probably two different answers, and I'll start with the cows. I mean, I love their faces and their personalities, and they're great to paint, but I think there's a bit more to it than that. I grew up in the city, and moving to the country was a big lifestyle change and a very conscious and intentional decision. And to me, the cows just say, yeah, this is where I want to be. You know, the fact that I can look out my studio window and see cows, even though it's 25 years since we moved to the country, it still just makes me happy every day. So I guess that's part of the cow answer. With the crows, you know, I did the crow series
After India.
in India. So we were living in a house that was literally perched on the edge of a cliff on the top of a mountain. And my studio was the back porch, and the woods were behind us, and these crows would swoop out of the woods right over my heads and down into the valley, so that they would be flying at my eye level, or if anything, I was looking down on them. Like, it was just such a unique vantage point. And they're just so beautiful. I don't know. And I had this sense that I was kind of like flying along with them over this valley. So to me, there was just this incredible sense of freedom, as if I could imagine myself in flight watching them.
That show was memorable. I remember how people would react. They either really hate it or just love it.
Yeah, some people don't like blackbirds.
They're frightened. Crows are intimidating. It's great.
Probably should have done doves, you know. But
Well, speaking of, looking out your window, when you were saying that, I was struck by it's the morning and you're looking at the cows in the field, and it's the dusk and you're looking at these wonderful crows. But what time of day do you like to paint? Is your energy different during different times of day or night?
yeah, I like to start off in the morning, and a lot of it is energy. It's partly brighter in my studio, but also I think there's just this sense of not putting it off, of taking the most important thing you want to do that day and doing it first. And this time of year it gets a little tough when the light really starts to fade so early in the afternoon, and I have pretty decent lighting in my studio, but if I can, I prefer to paint in natural light. So yeah, morning, not to say I only paint in the morning, I can kind of paint at any time of day, but I like to get a good start, a good 3 hours before I do anything else.
So this might be hard, but this is a question that came out of our group talking. And what is it that you think or that you feel it is about your artwork that appeals to others?
Well, okay, that's a really good question, because I know I can only tell you what appeals to me.
Yeah, but what would
So I think part of it is this, particularly when I'm painting people, and not to disparage any other artists, but my people are never generic. They're not imagined, they're real. They're very real people, and they're people who I care deeply about. And I really do believe that comes through in the painting, so that even if you don't know these people, they seem real, and that feeling that I have when I paint them, I hope comes through. When it's a landscape, I guess it's almost the same thing. And I do sometimes paint landscapes that are imaginary, that are out of my head. But I believe that they come from years and years of being out in the world and seeing landscape and really, really observing it while I paint. So I think there's a connection with nature that I feel very deeply when I paint, and I think maybe other people see that in my paintings.
Now, you have a background in architecture, and how has that influenced your artwork? Speaking of the natural form.
No, it's interesting, because I think some people think, oh, architects, they should paint buildings, but architecture is essentially a study of design, And a painting is a design exercise. And it's interesting because I teach and I have students who are quite skilled in some ways, and they don't necessarily have that design background. And I think it makes a huge difference. So in design, when you're talking about a visual image, there's balance and there's tension. And you always want to have both. So for example, if I'm painting, a person in a landscape, the landscape tends to be very horizontal, and that creates a sense of ease and relaxation and a sense of expansiveness. Whereas the vertical person creates a tension with that horizontality. So there's always a balance. To what extent is this painting going to have horizontal lines? To what extent is it going to have vertical? It's the same with light and dark. So these paintings have a lot more light, very few midtones, and some hopefully well-placed darks. And that's about balance and tension. And that kind of comes into color placement, shape placement, line placement. So I really do believe that my architecture background informs my paintings, even though it might not be apparent to other people.
Well, also I seem to remember when you were telling me, when you were studying architecture, you did life study.
We did. So I was very fortunate. I studied architecture at McGill and had a drawing teacher who, first of all, really believed that everybody could learn to draw, so you didn't have to come in with a drawing portfolio. And we had life drawing every week for 3 years. We had a live model. So that's how we learned. We didn't sketch buildings. We did a little bit. We would go sketching for a week every summer. But we mainly learned from a live model. So it was all about drawing what you see. His favorite mantra was draw what you see, not what you know. So don't assume that, I know an arm is long. If the arm is coming at you, it's going to be foreshortened and that sort of thing. So really great drawing training in school
Well, along that line, and it's a question that was asked of Erica, it is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received as it relates to your craft? These are hard questions.
It's a good question. Well, I was thinking, but I was listening to Erica's, so I had time to think about it. Well, I think it's this, and I think it applies to any kind of creative venture, is don't sit around waiting for inspiration to strike. Inspiration is going to come when you're in your studio and you're working hard, and the more you work, the more inspired you will be. And this is, I find, absolutely true. If I don't paint for a while, I start to wonder whether I even still know how to paint. I start to doubt my abilities, and I have no idea what I'm going to paint when I get back to it. If I'm painting every day, all I can think of is what I want to paint next. I have so many ideas, they just keep coming and coming. So I think that's probably the best advice.
Yeah, really. That's lovely. Well, on behalf of Studio 22, the Open Gallery, we want to thank you very, very much for this lovely show. And for this very weird opening night that we all are trying to experience this crazy
Thank you. I always, just so I can say one more thing, when I paint in my studio, I never get to see a whole series of paintings at once. It's only when I bring them here and Ali hangs them on the wall that I get to actually experience it as a series. So thank you for the opportunity, and
Our
thanks
pleasure.
everyone online for tuning in with us.
Yes, and please, studio is located in downtown Kingston on 320 King Street in the heart of historical Market Square. We want to thank you very much, everyone, for a lovely evening, and please stay safe, be well. Good night.